Hello, and welcome to the world of Terrea. This is a video about my personal GM style that is supposed to give you a bit of a look behind the scenes of how I play. And this is not supposed to be descriptive or, how you should play. This is just so when you figure out your own GM style, we can figure out how our two styles can mesh and we can tell wonderful stories. And so to start off with, my style can be loosely described as two key points. It's that your character's personality is just as important as your character's sheet. And the second thing is that I'm a very improv heavy GM. I don't really plan too much and I just go with the flow. And to kind of highlight that point, I'm going to show you my prep for the last session. It's literally one page of a small book. And there's nothing on the other side. And this other side is my notes, which is very, very messy. But yeah, I'll quickly just show you the prep. It's a list of names that I should remember. A description of Grove, the city, because I wanted it to pop a bit more. It is the pre-bot head descriptions of how it works, and then the encrypted letter. Everything else about the last session, Vivarain, about Yoto, about the hostages, Gorog and Pika, and even about Gerrick, the reformed Krieg bot. All of that was simply improv. I did have another sheet, another browser window open, full of monsters and stuff, and some reference notes and stuff like that. But we didn't even do the combat, so I won't technically include that as part of my prep. And that's a wonderful thing that we didn't do combat. I thought the session was so much better because of it. But to go back to the points, and I'll give some explanation as to each of these points. So the first thing is your character personality is just as important as your character stats. I feel that sometimes that 5% chance of failure is a bit much. So for instance, with Bendris, he is supposed to be a Gouldian technology expert. And so when he's going off on his tangents and describing that kind of stuff, I'm not going to make him roll because that's part of his character. It's expected that he will have that sort of knowledge. And the only time I will probably make you roll is when it's a decisive or critical moment in the story. Or that you are contesting, it's a contest of wills against another character in the story, just to give that sense of feeling of overcoming an obstacle, of achieving success. Or sometimes, failure, and then how do you pick yourself up from that failure? And the last thing is simply sometimes I just need a flip of the coin to decide between multiple options. Or I have a descriptive sheet here, and I need to know how much to tell you. So I'll get you to roll that skill, and I can tell you how much you're supposed to know based off that roll. But that's the easy part of my style. The more complex and dynamic part is my storytelling. And it basically starts from me trying to get interesting ideas out of your comments as players about the story, about your ideas of where the campaign's going and stuff like that. And sometimes it could be just off the cuff remarks. So when I was talking about Krieg one time, this is way back when Krieg was introduced, I was talking about Krieg and I introduced some sort of text, I don't know what it was, and the instant response from the player base was, you cannot make Krieg relatable. He is irredeemable. And in that moment, I kept that to the side because I thought that's an interesting story arc. Can we make Krieg redeemable? And that was kernel nuggets stuck with me for like a couple of weeks and stuff like that. I thought about it. I came up with different ways to introduce it, and I kind of landed on Garrick. And all that was improv, that whole scenario. But even though it was improv in that moment, it had its roots from weeks and weeks ago. And that kind of goes into the second point, which is sometimes your players' interpretations of my descriptions and of my storytelling, your interpretation of what's happening, can sometimes be better than mine. For instance, when Rooric was working on Garrick the Creekbot, it was supposed to take out the tracking device. In my mind, it was going to be, you have a look, make a roll, and then you just yank it out and everything's done. But somehow in my description of the event, or Rooric's own interpretation of what was happening, he complicated it. He asked, is it possible that we can break Garrick the robot if I take his tracking device out? And I do not want to do that because this is not Krieg. And that interpretation of this whole scenario was so much more interesting than what I had planned. I was going to just take it out. But this idea of we can't, taking the risk of keeping the tracking device inside of the Creekbot, walking with this Creekbot and allowing him to be this compromised entity within the party, such a much more interesting story than I had originally planned to tell. That's the kind of idea when I get a point that you guys influence the story so much more than whatever I prep. So that also has its downsides. There's a lot of plot churn as I try to throw things at you to see what sticks. The classic example is Ulrich. I was throwing Ulrich at you guys as a way to introduce this whole multiverse idea. He had a spear that can travel the multiverse realms. But unfortunately, the way he was introduced kind of clashed with the personalities of the characters. And that, unfortunately, not unfortunately, that's the way the story goes. I take a character personalities, I hold it in high regard. And because of that clash of personalities, I understood that Ulrich had to go. He just couldn't be part of the story at that point in time. He could come back. He may or may not be on the whiteboard behind me where I kind of map out all the other ideas. But that's, for the future. And so the second point would be Claudine. Claudine, the Gouldian child, and the three other children. Unfortunately, there's a lot of good story to be told there, but the way it's kind of framed made it sound that you are just going to become bodyguards to these kids, and it felt that you guys were just planning on getting the kids somewhere safe and then moving on with the rest of the story, that Claudine was just going to be a side quest. And so I kind of didn't like that idea for what I had planned for Claudine. So I put that whole story arc on hold until something else that we generate in our storytelling makes it more viable to go down the Claudine path. So basically, don't feel bad if you feel that you rejected one of my plot hooks, because that's the whole idea of my style, is I'll keep on throwing things until something clicks. The flip side of that is something has to click for us to keep on going. So just keep that in mind. If I'm throwing plot hooks, you don't have to engage, but you have to engage in some sort of hook. Or if you can't engage with the hook I'm giving, then give me a hook. Give me a character from your backstory to chase down, or some sort of quest, personal quest for your character, and then we can go forward that way. And the final point to all this, the thing that literally ties all this together with that final point, is that you have full character control, like full creative control of your character. It's late. And that's obviously within reason. You know, you can't all of a sudden have the 5 Infinity Stones in your pocket when you need to, because you just had it this whole time. But stuff like your characters' relationships with other people, they may know someone in this town because they were there previously for some reason, or you know some trader or something like that. We do not have to decide beforehand that that's the case. You can just introduce it at any time, any element of your backstory, come up with it on the spot and just throw it out there. And as long as it's within reason, we'll work with it. And a good example of that is Cattle. Just started playing and came up with Hanky Fever. I had no idea what Hanky Fever does, but now it's canon, and apparently it ruins your body. There is also that he came up with the fact that he made 12 creepbots. That's part of his backstory. And I rolled with it. It doesn't break anything that I had in mind, and it sounded like a cool idea. Gives you guys a target. Whether or not that's all the creepbots in the world, that's another story. It could be other people making them. But that's the idea, is that you don't have to feel restrictive about your character. If there's something that you want to introduce about your character, let me know and we'll work it into the story. And that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next session.